Thank you, Paul, and thank you everybody for coming out this afternoon to hear me. The theme of our gathering here in Chicago is belief, and it's a loaded term. It's a powerful term. It's a term that requires deep thought and interrogation, and so I'm thrilled to add my perspective to it. But I think we all have something to say about it. Let me just say that this is sort of a tough time in so many ways, but especially today. This morning, 25 people were killed in a church in Texas. And if this event is anything like the hundreds of similar events we've seen over the past few years, if this event gets anywhere near the attention and concern that we've seen when someone opens fire in an elementary school or at a concert, one of the things you will see in the next 48 hours, if you pay attention to these things, and I don't suggest you do for your own mental health, is you will see people declare that it didn't happen, or that it didn't happen as it happened, that it was faked, that it was a false front, a false flag. And when they make these declarations, they will be believed by some people, by enough people. And then the process of reacting to that disbelief, to that belief about the disbelief, will start us on a vortex of claims and counterclaims and screams and anger about that very question, right? About that, what you would think would be a settled empirical question. And that's where we will be stuck, or at least many of us will be stuck. And most of the time we get stuck in the comment section of our Facebook pages. And before you know it, you look up and you've spent 90 minutes of an otherwise nice Tuesday trying to correct some friend of an uncle about some claim. Now, this doesn't happen just on Facebook, of course. And the denial of something that's so painful is maybe not the most consequential denial. I know it's certainly not the most consequential denial, although it seems the most cruel of denials. About 5 days after President Trump was inaugurated, his chief advisor, Kellyanne Conway, appeared on Meet the Press. And at that, on that show, on that Sunday, she was asked about the demonstrably false claims that the White House had made about the size of the crowd at the inauguration. And her response was that Sean Spicer, the press secretary at the time, had presented alternative facts. And she seemed completely comfortable with that statement, as comfortable as, if Spicer has ever looked comfortable, as comfortable as Spicer was in asserting that. Now, every time that something like that happens, the interrogator, the reporter, and more than half of the citizens of the United States stand there with mouth agape, just stunned by the audacity of such a claim. We have no purchase upon which we can argue this. It seems like a complete waste of time, and yet we feel the deep need to respond because, of course, why wouldn't you respond to such nonsense put forth by such powerful people who have such consequential jobs and can make a difference, positive and negative, to all of us and to everyone around the world? Now, what's bizarre about that moment, and you probably remember it as well as I do, is that it didn't really matter in the sense it wasn't about anything important. Like, ultimately, there's no material difference to the fact of X number of people attended an inauguration. There is no material difference. There's really only one person in America who cared deeply about that question, all right? And the lesson of that is we probably shouldn't, but we should care deeply about the fact that for some reason we were expected to buy that claim. And so this is the weird thing. Now, here I am talking about it. I've just spent 5 or 6 minutes talking about something thoroughly inconsequential, but the meta level of it is actually consequential. This is not, as I said, a Facebook thing completely, right? It is a problem so wide, so broad, and so deep that it actually goes to our ability to govern ourselves. It goes to our ability to make sense of the world. And so the consequences of that audacity could not be greater. And we have this, we enter this conversation, and here you are hoping to hear me speak about Facebook, at a time when, so this is one thing, I teach a class that is starting from the premise of the Gallup surveys that track faith in American institutions, trust in American institutions, actually is a better term for it. And as you probably know, public trust in the major institutions of our lives has been decreasing steadily for more than 20 years. Something happened about 20 years ago that significantly eroded public trust in education, in science, in the military, in the government, in religious institutions. Like almost every major institution that Gallup has been tracking for 50 years has suffered a pretty severe hit to its reputation. Now, you might say that's healthy, that healthy level of cynicism, that ability, that willingness of Americans to question authority, right? That's, Thomas Paine wanted us to do that. It was one of the most important lessons of the counterculture and the New Left in the 60s. It was the sort of thing that so many people pushed against to fight back against the post-war conformity, right? Question authority. Well, we're at a point now where there actually are two sources of authority where trust is increasing. And those two sources of authority are Google search results and what your Facebook friends tell you. While everything else erodes, we care and trust more. Those two things. We care and trust more what the screen on our little box in our pocket or our bag tells us than what our religious institutions tell us, what our scientific institutions tell us, what the FBI tells us, what the White House tells us. So for the White House to make a statement that is so obviously absurd, the purpose was not to get us to believe it. The purpose was to continue that trend so we believe nothing. That was the goal and remains the goal of that particular communicative strategy. The less we believe, the less we trust in institutions, the more those who are relying on that administration to execute its will benefit. That's the game. And the game, as I said, is not new, nor is it particularly isolated to the White House. It's actually a game that's quite well played out in authoritarian regimes. It is how authoritarian leaders maintain support. They don't maintain power the way totalitarian leaders do, through the threat and fear of violence, although that can be deployed when necessary. They actually maintain popular support, and many of them are elected and remain popular enough to actually have been reelected in somewhat fair and free elections, Vladimir Putin being the best example, or Erdogan in Turkey being the second best example, perhaps. They maintain this by constantly keeping this question of what is true churning to the point where it doesn't matter what is true. And if all things fall apart, then what they say is true. That is what we really have to fear. And again, not just because of the White House. We have to fear an erosion in our ability to think collectively. Because if we can't even agree on the problems, and we can't even agree on the facts of the matter, then we can't argue through, compromise on, and chart a path to address the very real problems we face. Now, Facebook actually plays a role in this. So here's where I go from the big global down to the local in the sense of the screen in your pocket. Facebook has almost 2.2 billion users around the world. There is almost nothing that has that kind of subscription base or reach, influence, however you want to phrase it. 2.2 billion people. That's pretty mind-blowing. Facebook is the most pervasive and most influential media system the world has ever seen. It is one of the most influential companies the world has ever seen. Facebook did not exist as a company before 2005. It did not exist as a technology before 2004. It just got here, and it already connects, or at least influences, 2.2 billion people. So the general category of social media is huger than Facebook, but Facebook is the major player in it. So here's a chart of the number of social media users in total with estimates like sort of projections through 2021, and you can see 2.46 billion in 2017. You can imagine, right, 2 billion of them are Facebook users alone. The rest, 0.46 billion, are spread among a variety of other services. Here are the most notable the most notable social media services. You'll see that Facebook is by a large margin the most popular, with YouTube, which is owned by Google, right behind it. The next two, WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger, owned by Facebook. They share sort of a back end. They share vast pools of data, dossiers on each of us, and they share the ability. Well, they share revenue for one thing. So if one is making money, it can subsidize the others. The next one is WeChat. WeChat is the most popular social media platform in the People's Republic of China, and growing to be the most popular in the Chinese diaspora around the world. I'll talk about WeChat a bit more later. QQ is another China-based social media system. It's more of a messaging system. And next is Instagram, owned by Facebook. So WeChat and QQ operating mostly in the People's Republic of China, where Facebook is not allowed to operate. None of Facebook's subsidiaries are allowed to operate. You can sort of break that out and say, China has its own thing going on, its own media ecosystem anyway. But if you look at the rest of the world, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the top 5 social media systems are owned by Facebook, or owned by Facebook. So that's a tremendous amount of power. Now, Mark Zuckerberg makes big, broad statements about the mission of his company pretty frequently. He does so in the financial documents, but he also gives rather stirring, carefully constructed speeches about this. And he does it about every 6 months at a big event, or sometimes when he sits for an interview. He has very well-rehearsed statements, and this is, I think, a good example of how he describes what he does. We stand for connecting every person, for a global community, for bringing people together, for giving all people a voice, for the free flow of ideas and cultures across nations. That all sounds wonderful. It actually sounds much like the mission of the Chicago Humanities Festival. However, the Chicago Humanities Festival has a very different way of going about things. It brings people into the same room. It introduces speakers and ideas in ways that allow for back and forth and deliberation with the person who actually makes the statement. It's a very different dynamic. The medium matters in this case. Nonetheless, I'd like you to think about this. This is the mission of Facebook. This is the goal of Facebook. And Zuckerberg has said something similar time and time again about it. We stand for connecting every person. Now, you can't connect every person to every other person, and that's not what Facebook does. Facebook connects every person to some other people, some group of people who generally choose which group of people they will be connected to. Now, because of the principle of homophily, we tend to connect with each other based on what we share. We tend to connect with people much like us, either people who are related to us or have interacted with us, or we've dated, or we broke up with but still kind of hope to get back with, or people mostly who are from our background, our perspective, and share our interests. Not exclusively, which is why that uncle's cousin is putting all that nonsense on Facebook and you're wasting so much of a Tuesday afternoon responding to that person. But what happens is Facebook itself is structured around the concept of engagement. That's the term of art in Facebook and actually in Silicon Valley, engagement. In order for Zuckerberg to make this work, to bring people together and to give all people a voice under his terms, he has to make sure that we don't just try to drink from a fire hose of expressions of our hundreds of friends or thousands of friends, however many, and I say friends in quotes, right, that you have on Facebook. He has to help us select what comes across our newsfeed. He can't have us just encounter all of this flow of expression in real time as people post, with no real filter, because that would be a frustrating experience for us. We would not actually like that. If everybody we're connected to on Facebook had equal opportunity of having their expressions, their photos, etc., and the things that they share and comment on scroll before our eyes. So Facebook's algorithm selects for us what we will see every day, every minute of every day. And toward that end, it has to have some principle upon which to choose what Siva will see this afternoon. Well, it turns out what Siva will see this afternoon are items from people and about subjects that I have engaged with. Again, there's that magic word, engaged with in the past. So if I have clicked on a link, if I have liked a post from a friend, if I have commented on a friend's post, if I've engaged in a back and forth with a particular friend, or if I have clicked and read and shared items from a particular publication, then Facebook knows, especially over time as I build up my dossier with Facebook, that I'm the kind of person who likes this stuff and the kind of person who doesn't really like this stuff. And I'm the kind of person who likes this person and not this person so much. And so my news flow will steadily grow to reflect my interests. And Facebook is quite explicit about this. Facebook is quite clear about the fact that it wants to deliver to us the content that we find most interesting, engaging, and useful. And how does it measure that? Again, clicks, likes, comments. Clicks, likes, and comments. And shares, right? Clicks, shares, likes, and comments, right? So given that that's how it measures engagement, what gets the most reaction? What gets the most engagement? Well, things that generate high emotional reaction. Puppies, right? And baby pictures and hate speech are just to name three, right? Now, it's a longer list than that, but those are in the top 5 of things that generate reaction. I mean, think about the things you've reacted to, whether it was hate speech about someone or hate speech you might share. Let's hope you don't. But, you know, those sorts of very punchy, powerful expressions, the sort of expressions that either fire you up like, I knew that guy was corrupt, I'm going to like this and share this. I am really mad that my uncle's cousin or uncle's friend or whatever the heck, I've lost the person who's posting all the difficult stuff, has put on there, and I'm going to react to that person, right? That sort of engagement. Now, what happens over time with that? It means that the stronger the statement, the more powerful the statement, the more visceral the statement. Again, whether it's cute puppies or terrible like rages against people, those things are going to travel the farthest. Those things are going to move around other people's Facebook news feeds the most. If you were to sit down at Facebook and you look at that little box at the top and you start typing, 800 words of thoughtful prose about the rate of the polar ice caps melting and your deep concern for it, and maybe some suggestions that we as a species might consider to slow the melting of the polar ice caps. And let's say it's a really insightful, calm, well thought out, well researched, perfectly acceptable response. I guarantee that almost no one will see it. Your mom would probably see it. That's about it. Because it would have to be like the person who most engages with you who would see that. But almost nobody else would see it. For a couple of reasons. You didn't include a video. You didn't include an image. And you didn't hit someone's emotions in a strong, powerful way. And so Facebook has no reason to distribute this. It's just not going to get much reaction. And really, climate change is a bit of a downer, and people tend not to click and share and like things about climate change on Facebook. So what that means is that Facebook is, over time, a lens through which light gets focused, like any lens, like the ones I'm wearing, and light gets focused in a particular way. Intense feelings, and intense feelings from an increasingly narrow set of sources. What many people call a filter bubble will emerge unless you push back at it, and people do, so that's why the sort of empirical measurement of filter bubbles is a big open question, but the fact that Facebook builds them in the first place, you can pop the bubble, but Facebook is basically trying to narrow your focus constantly to the things that make you feel like you're the smartest person in the world, and have the best friends who are so smart, right? No matter what your position is on any particular issue, it constantly wants you to be rewarded. And you start saying, oh my gosh, I hope my friends like what I just posted, because likes get counted. So I just put up what I thought was a hilarious joke. I've got this urge to reach into my pocket every 35 seconds and check to see how many likes I have. And Facebook is explicitly designed to hook you the way that a video poker machine hooks someone in a casino or in the Las Vegas airport. So people miss their flights because they're busy playing video poker, because you just can't walk away. And you don't walk away because you think you're going to win. You can't walk away because the very little pleasure of potentially winning is what keeps you there. I tell my students it's, imagine this, right? I put out for you a bag of potato chips, and I put out 4 cupcakes. And I say, which would you prefer? What would welcome to the bag of potato chips or 4 cupcakes. Almost everybody's going to go for the cupcakes, and they're going to eat 1 cupcake. They're not going to eat all 4. They're just going to say, oh, this is a really satisfying experience. This was an enriching experience. I mean, let's assume it's a really good cupcake, right? And a really enriching experience. And I would much rather have that one enriching experience than this bag of chips, right? But if all I laid out for you was that bag of chips, the bag of chips would be gone in 30 minutes. And you would not have enjoyed any particular chip as much as you would have enjoyed even 1 bite of that cupcake. But people eat bags of potato chips anyway, despite the very low level of pleasure that they deliver. And that's what Facebook is like. It's like a big bag of chips, and just as good for you. It's constantly giving you, a friend of mine calls it a Skinner box. It's like operant conditioning, as B.F. Skinner described it. You're constantly being prodded with this very subtle, low-level pleasure to interact with Facebook. Occasionally, displeasure. But, it's always something. You get a little bit of feeling throughout your day as you interact with Facebook. And Facebook loves it, and it's explicitly designed to keep you coming back. So increasingly, you live through this. You live through and so it becomes the site for interacting in a personal and social way. The prime site. It becomes the prime site for so much of your commercial interactions in the world as well, through its advertising system. And it becomes, and this is most dangerous, the prime site for us to behave politically, to be political animals, as Aristotle would say. And that is the problem. And every one of these domains gets scrambled by Facebook. In the personal realm, look, in your daily life, without even articulating it, you segment and segregate the people in your lives. You manage information in the different contexts in which throughout the different contexts through which you operate. So you know that there is certain information about yourself that you will share with your partner, but not with your boss, with your clergy, but not with your softball teammate. I shouldn't have picked softball because you guys don't really play softball here in Chicago. You play some weird version. So I should have said something at basketball, right? So now, we do that from the time we're like 6 years old. Like the first time you figure out, oh, I shouldn't have said that to the kid down the street because now he's running around telling everybody that. That's social abrogation. That trains us over time to manage the information about us in these discrete social contexts. And like these circles have intersections, of course, like any set, and it's fluid. And someone who's in the friend or the coworker circle can someday move into a romantic partner. That happens. And so the terms of exchange of information change. This is, what I've just described to you, is what we often refer to as privacy, but we don't really talk about it that way because we think of privacy as being some sort of, substance or something you have to defend. But in fact, it's a description of the fact that we have the autonomy, or we hope to have the autonomy, over the distribution of information in particular social contexts. That's a long mouthful. Privacy kind of works, to satisfy all that. But look, Facebook scrambles all that because pretty soon, your lovers and your exes and your bosses and your ex-bosses are all in the same milieu, and they're all seeing the same posts, and they're all reacting to you, and you're constantly wondering, oh my gosh, did I say something that my ex will be offended by? I hope not, right? And that creates anxiety. All of a sudden you're thinking more about Facebook in your given day, and it creates tensions, but mostly it disorients us. It disorients us and yet keeps us coming back. And that's really what Facebook does. It disorients us in important ways that render us dependent on it and constantly interacting with it. It becomes the forum through which we make our expressions and our connections and then have to clean up for them if we think we've done the wrong thing, or if someone else does the wrong thing for us, to us, about us. All right. So Facebook does another thing. It scrambles our sense of time. So this was 4 years ago. My dog is now 4 years old. This was the day that we took her home from the breeder. She is actually that cute. This is not a doctored photo. And this is what I think Facebook does really well the first time. When I posted this the first time, 4 years ago, I was meaning to declare to all of my friends that I now have the cutest puppy in the world, and I could not be happier. And she is totally fluffy and loving and all of that good stuff, everything you can imagine, right? So, but Facebook now every once in a while throws something up from a time in the past and messes with my day. Now this wasn't so bad. It was kind of like, oh, I remember that day. That was cute, and that's what Facebook wants to do, but Facebook doesn't know the content of these photos. It just knows that this was the image that generated the most reaction, the most engagement on this day 4 years ago. What if it had been my uncle's funeral, or my father's funeral, or my child's funeral? If I had posted something that day about anything terrible happening in my life, that would have generated hundreds of reactions from my friends and family, appropriately. And yet, Facebook would constantly remind me of that terrible day, right? Of that terrible day. But Facebook's algorithms can't tell the terrible from the cute. They just measure the reactions. So again, scrambling what should be very distinct moments in our lives into one flow, scrambling our circles, our social circles, into one milieu, and measuring engagement. I mean, that's really what's happening here. And so it really creates a disorienting mess. And it does other things to our commercial areas. And I'll pick just one area. So Facebook is the most powerful and effective advertising system ever invented, which is why it's the most powerful and widely distributed media system in the world. It didn't get that way by accident. It didn't get to tremendous revenue. Actually, more than $10 billion in the last quarter. That's stunning. $10 billion in profit in the last quarter. That's pretty amazing. Facebook has something like 4,000 employees. Fewer people work at Facebook than worked at one of General Motors' plants in the 1960s. So Facebook employs almost nobody. It has almost no effect on the economy of the United States of America. And yet, it has this tremendous market capitalization. Facebook Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, in various positions, are the 5 most capitalized companies in the world in 2017, and have been since about May. Since about May 2017. They are the wealthiest corporations in the world. Amazon actually employs a lot of people because it pays almost nothing for them to work in very hot, air-conditioned warehouses around the world, but it's the only one of those companies that employs a lot of people. And yet, this is where the investment money of the world is going because the returns are so good on each of those companies. Here is Facebook's revenue growth. The line graph is the rate of growth, and the bar graph is total revenue through the second quarter of 2016. As I said just a minute ago, the third quarter of 2017 exceeded $10 billion. So it was 6.4 in the second quarter of 16. A year and 3 months later, it was $10 billion. Nothing is stopping this company in terms of new enrollees around the world and new money. How does it do it? It runs this amazingly effective advertising system where if you go on and you actually want to buy an ad, you can spend almost nothing to reach exactly the right people for your product or idea. And it lets you can see this is sort of how an audience is like. You get to pick your own audience. Now, if you watch football on a Sunday, like any other Sunday, because you're not doing it today because you're here, if you watch football on a Sunday, you'll see big expensive ads for Budweiser, big expensive ads for Coca-Cola, big expensive ads for Chevy and Ford, because they're trying to hit a mass audience, not a segmented audience, and they do pretty well, right? Enough Americans drink Budweiser that they don't need to pick out all the Budweiser drinkers in America and carefully tailor their ads to them. But Budweiser is a special product. There aren't a lot of those products that appeal to enough millions of Americans that it makes it worth it to advertise on a Sunday on football, on an NFL football game. But for most products and most companies, the best thing in the world would be not to waste money reaching an audience that would not be interested in the first place in your product. So you don't, the old way of saying this is you don't want to try to sell cat food to a dog owner or dog food to a cat owner, right? Simple as that. If you were in that business, that would be that would be money wasted. But remember, before Facebook and Google really invented this sort of targeting and measuring and monitoring, because both Facebook and Google will give companies very precise reports on how well their ads did, whether their ads generated interest, response, and sales. That's a totally new, mind-blowing thing. In the age of Mad Men, it was a thoroughly faith-based practice. Advertising companies would tell companies, oh yeah, people will see your ads, they will love your product, and they will buy stuff. And here we have a focus group of 5 people who will tell you what the ad does, right? And who knows if the focus group is representative or if that's going to last over time or whatever. But what a great thing for the ad business, right? They're totally having to try new things all the time. The companies that are paying them have to trust their expertise. All that's out the window now with Facebook and Google, to the point where Facebook and Google are something like half of all the ad business in the United States right now. And 99 cents of every new dollar in 2016 and 17 put into the advertising world goes to either Facebook or Google. All the new growth in advertising goes to Facebook or Google. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that any company that used to depend on advertising, like the Chicago Tribune, like CNN, those companies are scrambling because companies are quickly figuring out, why should I spend $100,000 on a display ad in the Chicago Tribune and have no way of measuring how effective it was and no way of picking my audience when I could spend a lot less on Facebook and get exactly to that place. If I'm selling winter boots, I don't want to hit people who already have winter boots. I want to hit people who have been curious about winter boots, who have maybe been hopping around the web looking at winter boots on websites. And of course, because Facebook and also Google track everything you do on the web, if you're using a web browser, they know if you've been shopping for winter boots, which is why when you go to a site and you start clicking around for a particular product, before you know it, that product's ads show up in your Facebook feed. because Facebook's tracking what you do everywhere and trying to very precisely target those ads to you because obviously you're in the market for winter boots, right? So this is really powerful, really effective. It's destroying journalism, among other things. It's destroying other parts of the entertainment industry too. But it's really undermining journalism in some pretty serious ways. In addition, imagine this. If you run a publication like the Chicago Tribune or CNN, right, your job is to get viewers. If you're going to get viewers or readers, you want to maintain a shrinking audience or expand a shrinking audience, you have to play the Facebook game. You have to be active on Facebook. You have to tailor your content to echo on Facebook. And so you will bring in consultants and they will tell you, and actually Facebook will help you, and they will tell you, you know, you need more video. You need more powerful images. You need more highly emotionally engaging headlines. And if you do all that and you structure the text of your stories and you use these particular subject areas, and by the way, we give you ways to test. You know, you do a story about agriculture policy, you'll get this result. You do a story about the reality show that was on last night, you get this reaction. And they present all this data. Now, of course, editors are going, I need to be able to thrive on Facebook. So I'm going to shift the needle over to the reality television show coverage, even if all it is summarizing what was on TV last night. And all of a sudden, covering agriculture policy is not that interesting. In fact, we're not even going to do it anymore because we're getting no response on Facebook about it. And there's no sexy picture or video that we can use. So the engagement principles of Facebook are altering the practice of journalism. Journalism is pandering to Facebook in terms of what it covers and how it structures it. And meanwhile, journalistic institutions are feeding the very beast that's starving them of advertising money. That's the great situation we're in. All right, how does the political world get scrambled? Well, I probably don't have to tell you too much about this. It's kind of been obvious. I mean, one of them is kind of what I described before. Like the filter bubble makes it harder for us to engage with each other. Or even to encounter reasonable responses from people who might disagree with us about reasonable things. Because the reasonable don't go very far on Facebook. So the stuff that you disagree with that does hit your news feed is the absurd stuff, right? You may have 20, 50, 100 friends who disagree with you on some basic political issues who are completely reasonable, informed people who are posting and writing and sharing things that are well thought out and deserve measured response. And they might be nice enough people that you could actually accomplish that if you were in the same room with them. If you sat down and tried to think through a problem. I mean, that's an idealized situation, but it's been known to happen on occasion. It doesn't happen on Facebook because the structure of Facebook is such that it is great for motivation. It's terrible for deliberation. Facebook is an amazing tool if you want to mount a campaign for anything. A campaign to occupy a square, a campaign to, in my case, I had a sort of very quick Facebook-motivated operation that, so the gym I go to, which many people in Charlottesville go to, sort of secretly changed its policy to allow for people to carry handguns into it. And no one told us that they had changed the policy to allow handguns until a gun fell out during yoga class. Yeah, I know, right? It's so right? That a gun, right? You know, like who brings a gun to yoga? Come on, what's going to happen, right? So, yeah, I mean, like it totally ruined the mood, I'm sure, you know? So, but it was a terrifying moment for everybody else in that yoga class, and word quickly spread around Charlottesville that the gym had changed the policy and that people were carrying guns to yoga class. So my friends and I launched a Facebook-based campaign where we quickly gathered several thousand signatures of members of this gym. It's like the largest gym in Charlottesville. And we said, we will give the gym 30 days to change its policy or we're all resigning. 30 days later, which happened to be January, which is, of course, when every gym wants to maximize its enrollment. So the policy changed in 48 hours, fortunately. So that's the sort of thing you can do on Facebook. The sort of thing you can like rile people up, emotionally powerful stuff, a gun in yoga class, right? And there's, by the way, the gym, the reason we all signed up is there's amazing childcare at this gym, Like, our kids are there. Like, that's why we're in the gym, right? And kids and guns, not so good. So it was real easy, real efficient, really powerful to get something done that way. But one of the things that happened when we were sharing all this stuff is that we would get comments from people, often who weren't our friends, who just were like friends of other people in the community, who would launch very pro-gun messages. But of course, in unhelpful ways, right? In like insulting, like, why are you bullying a small business owner? Okay, that if you were in the same room as I am, maybe we could talk through that premise, and we could talk about what bullying is and what it means to be and like what my stake in as a parent and patron of this business, all those sorts of things. But we can't do that on Facebook. All we can do is snipe at each other, insult each other, and angrily go back and forth, and then block each other when we just get sick of each other. I don't have time for this person. You're blocked, right? And that is the reaction. So it's a perfect example of how Facebook is great for motivation, terrible for deliberation. It's just not structured for people to have measured, informed discussions leading toward any sort of principle or practice of what we should call small R Republican citizenship, which is what we so desperately need. Now, add to the fact that nefarious forces understand how well the Facebook advertising system works, including people who work for the government of Russia, and we have another mess. Because it's so easy to spread propaganda on Facebook. In fact, if you wanted to, like if Facebook had never been invented, and you wanted to design a propaganda system for authoritarian rulers and various forms of nationalism, religious nationalism, ethnic nationalism, racial nationalism, you could not do better than Facebook. You would pretty much design this. Something that would attract lots of people who think they're in it for the puppy photos, and then they stay for the hate speech. And that's really what's happened. So thousands of, actually millions of Americans encountered images like this, faked images like this, sponsored by Russian Front Facebook groups during the run-up to the 2016 election. Now, what were they doing? They were trying to mess with us. The best we can figure is that they weren't trying to make Donald Trump president, because even Donald Trump didn't think he was going to be president up right until like 9 p.m. on November 8th. Even he didn't think he was going to be president. But what they really wanted to do was undermine our faith and trust in our democratic norms, in our fellow citizens, in our ability to manage and govern ourselves. So this is a long game. This is the long game that Vladimir Putin has been playing in Ukraine. He's been playing it throughout Eastern Europe. He and his agents have been busy scrambling the sense of reality to the people of Poland and Hungary, both of which, by the way, in the last 2 years elected authoritarian nationalist leaders. He's just succeeded there. We know that the same forces have interfered directly, largely through Facebook, in the Brexit Leave campaign. We know that they played similar games in recent elections in the Netherlands, in France, and in Germany to various levels of success. And that's just groups affiliated with Vladimir Putin. There are plenty of other forces around the world involved in this. In India, Narendra Modi, who is the prime minister, who when he was chief minister of the state of Gujarat, oversaw and basically turned his head away as thousands of Muslim citizens were slaughtered in a 2-day period, and basically excused all of the police malfeasance that contributed to that, who has a record of supporting anti-Muslim bigotry at every level, whose political party was founded by people who explicitly worship Adolf Hitler, is now the leader of the largest democracy in the world. He is remarkably popular. He is likely to win re-election with an overwhelming majority in parliament. And he is embraced by world leaders and corporate leaders around the world. His electoral success was fueled in large part by Facebook and WhatsApp activism. He hires armies of trolls to spread information and disinformation and misinformation on Muslims mostly, to generate fear. That's the major theme that they use. But he also uses Facebook and WhatsApp to spread efforts to shame political critics and opponents, journalists, academics, leaders of other parties, especially reform parties. They are subject to all sorts of doctored videos, reputation killers that just puts them off their game, right? They have to spend the next month of their lives trying to deal with and react to and respond to all of these accusations that are floating around social media. Sometimes they don't hear about it till millions of Indian voters have already seen this stuff. That playbook, by the way, that Modi has mastered is something that other nationalist and authoritarian leaders around the world are starting to pick up on. We saw echoes of it in Kenya just last month, but the most successful user of it after Modi is Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines, who uses these very same tactics. He also employs armies of trolls to embarrass, humiliate, and call out for violence against his critics, in addition to all of the extrajudicial killing that he has ordered or enabled of just people walking in the street who are suspected of being drug dealers. So on top of that, if you dare to challenge him, chances are Facebook and WhatsApp will be filled with nasty rumors about you, and you will have to deal with that. So Duterte is truly a master of using this. Now, Facebook, of course, did not want any of this to be the legacy of its influence on the world. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't like guys like that, despite the fact that he was hugging Modi in that picture, right? Mark Zuckerberg is actually a very deeply thoughtful, intelligent, sensitive young man who wants the best for the world. If he were in this room, most of us might agree with him on most questions and challenges and issues in the world. He's profoundly uneducated, though. He doesn't seem to understand or have a tragic sense. He doesn't quite grasp the fact that if you put 2.2 billion people through one system and you allow that sort of amplification of powerful feelings, that a good number of those 2.2 billion people will want to do harm to the rest. Now, if you've lived long enough, read long enough, that's not a surprise to you. You get that there are plenty of people in this world who want to do terrible things. But Zuckerberg's convinced that on balance, what he has contributed to the world is far better than any of the damage that has been done using his tools. And I think that's actually an open question. I think that's a question worthy of examining. And there are cases to be made that people have used Facebook and other social media tools to find connections with other people that are deep and meaningful that they might not have found otherwise. Whether that on balance that works to balance out the harm that has been perpetrated through it, and I'm not even starting to talk about what's going on in Myanmar right now, again, almost entirely fueled by anti-Muslim sentiment executed through Facebook and WhatsApp. But basically, he wants the world to be better. This is a billboard that, versions of this billboard showed up all over India 2 years ago. Facebook and Zuckerberg wanted to create a philanthropic effort that they call Free Basics. They saw that throughout the world there were people who could not afford data plans on their smartphones, or could not afford smartphones, right? Because the data plans, that's where the expense is. Think about how much every month you pay for data on your phone, and imagine that if your monthly income is about $10 to $30, chances are what you pay for data is what, 60, 70 bucks on top of whatever else you pay for the phone? It's not going to happen. So, recognizing this, Zuckerberg has gone around the world and cut deals with telecommunication companies in more than 40 countries, saying that if users use a Facebook-created operating system called Free Basics, that the use of that won't count against their data plans. Now, if you are a low-income person, or even if you're a high-income person and you want a good deal, in a country like Myanmar, like the Philippines, like Kenya, you're going to quickly adopt Free Basics and use it almost exclusively because it gives you access to Wikipedia, gives you access to a weather service, it gives you access to instant messages through Facebook Messenger, and it, of course, gives you access to Facebook. Now, if it's a media ecosystem like Myanmar, which as late as 2014 had 0 independent voices in the media and 0 internet connection, immediately you're going to grab this new smartphone that has free basics. And so as a result, in Myanmar, as to a lesser extent in the Philippines, the concept of the internet or the concept of a media ecosystem and Facebook are indistinguishable. They are the same thing. Everything you learn about the world, you learn through Facebook. Now, it turns out in India, the attempt to get free basics through and passed and legal failed because Zuckerberg and his allies made a terrible mistake. They came in as if they were missionaries. That doesn't go over well in India. There's a lot of sensitivity. Colonialism. They still remember it. It's not so good. And they came in saying, look, we will come into India. And, look, people in India think of their country with great pride. They understand that they have a large and growing technological sector, that they have some of the greatest computer engineers being trained in India, often exported, but some of them stay behind. They have an emerging economy. And there's no reason why India can't develop its own social media platform. And here was Mark Zuckerberg saying, we will save you, poor country. And India doesn't like to think of itself as a poor country. And it's really not in aggregate. And so there was a tremendous reaction, a nationalist reaction, a religious reaction. Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Facebook, wrote op-eds and gave speeches about how free basics will empower poor women throughout India. And the religious right in India, that was the last thing they wanted to hear. If you say you're going to empower women, they're like, oh, no, that's not going to happen. And so for a number of reasons, free basics failed in India. Nonetheless, this is really what it looks like if you have free basics. These are some of the basic applications you can use. And it's tremendously powerful and successful. All right, so here's where Facebook's going next. Facebook wants everything to be video. It's encouraging all of its users and all of its advertisers and all the news partners to load up video first. And as we know from Susan Sontag and others, the more visual the medium, the harder it is to have deep, thoughtful deliberation, and the easier it is to have very powerful emotions. In addition, he wants to introduce artificial intelligence and machine learning to every aspect of Facebook. And he sees virtual and augmented reality as the next step. So he's purchased a company called Oculus Rift that makes goggles through which you can look around the world and see information embedded. If I were looking out at you right now and I had Oculus Rift on, and through what might develop through Facebook is I might actually see a few pieces of information about each of you. Like I would see your name, I might see your age, I might see some interesting thing about you. And I could actually use it to search for, the person in this room who, went to my high school, right? I mean, it would be real easy to do a search the way that one would use Facebook. All of a sudden, this becomes my Facebook news feed if I'm wearing these goggles. So that's one of the things that that Zuckerberg is after. Basically, he wants to, and this is Oculus Rift. This was a conference at which he debuted the purchase of Oculus Rift. I love this photo. I hope I can use it as the cover of my book. I think it captures perfectly what I'm talking about. Look, Facebook, we all joined because of the puppies. We all joined because we wanted to stay in touch with people with whom we went to high school. People we probably, called once a year or got a holiday card from. If it had stayed that, if that were all we did through it, it would be a glorious thing. Something that actually brings us real value on balance. Not that it's still that, it still does much of that. But at some point, Facebook adopted a goal that is very different. It tried to become, and is trying to become, the operating system of our lives. It wants to be, it strives to be, and we are letting it be, the manager of the information flows in our lives. It's not the only company doing this. Google's trying the same thing through different tactics. Microsoft's trying the same thing through different tactics. Amazon, with its Alexa technology, is trying to do the same thing. Now, sometimes you hear about this notion of wiring everything and creating data flows to everything as the not as the operating system of our lives, which is my phrase, but as the Internet of Things. I'd like you to dismiss that idea. First of all, what everyone refers to as the Internet of Things is neither the Internet nor anything like the Internet, nor is it about things. It's about human beings and human bodies. It's about connecting, monitoring, watching over, tracking, and monetizing human beings and human bodies. That's what it is, for better or worse. It might involve and offer us conveniences we've never imagined, but I think it's imperative that we ask ourselves whether convenience is all that special. Isn't there virtue to inconvenience? Isn't there virtue to friction? Isn't the slow, deliberate movement of thought, ideas, and expressions also valuable, maybe more valuable? So I'm going to leave you with a wish. It's not that we all quit Facebook. I think that's unrealistic. We would all pay a social cost if we did that. And frankly, if every one of us quit Facebook tomorrow, would not even register at Facebook headquarters. Because during the time I've been talking, they gained another 500,000 users in sub-Saharan Africa. So it really doesn't make it, like the idea of like a bunch of Americans reading my book and quitting Facebook, like who cares, right? It would be great if I sold that many books, it would make a difference, but it's not gonna happen. So what I really want everyone to do is recognize the goal here, what Facebook wants from us and what Facebook wants to do to us. And it is, from Facebook's point of view, not nefarious. Zuckerberg thinks he is saving us. But like the entire country of India, maybe we don't want to be saved on his terms. But we do need to be saved. We need to save ourselves. We need to connect with each other in deeper, more human-based ways. We need to engage with each other more respectfully. We need to rebuild trust in the institutions that we so carefully built up over centuries. To give you one example, scientific communities. We built those up through a series of protocols, through a series of norms. We created communities of trust and exchange and criticism so that we could, over time, generate a somewhat dependable, fairly dependable set of principles, ideas, theories, and facts upon which we could act. And it would be under constant revision, and we would be okay with that. It would be under constant pressure, and we would be okay with that. And it's gotten us pretty far, right? As a species, we've done pretty well since Isaac Newton. We've done pretty well since Francis Bacon. I mean, depends on how you want to measure it, right? But we're breeding really well. So, we may not be doing all that much great stuff in the long term, but nonetheless, we're like the winning species. We're doing pretty cool, right? So, nonetheless, that practice, that I know that we've lost an appreciation for the contingency, the imperfections of, and yet the deep, powerful processes, the modesty of science. And we're at the point in this country and increasingly throughout the world, where we doubt science and trust technology. And that makes no sense at all. Anyway, I'll leave you with that. And I'd be happy to converse if we have any more time. I actually don't know if I've left you any time. Thanks.
Thank you for your presentation. That was very, very interesting. What happens if we talk about Zuckerberg being this idealist, a good person? Well, what about his successor?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I'll only be slightly facetious, but the guys, and they're all guys, who run Silicon Valley, they don't think they're going to die. I'm not making this up. There's this whole school of thought about staying healthy and living 200 years or longer. And they're convinced that they can invent faster than cancer will sneak up on them. And it's really scary. So they don't ask that question. They're fairly convinced that they're going to be immortal, even if no one else is. I don't know that that's true of Zuckerberg. He's not one of those evangelists of this cult, although many people in his circle are, including Peter Thiel, who is, let me tell you. He is a nasty person. Anyway, and he's he's on the Facebook board and he's Trump's advisor, one of the circle of economic advisors and so forth. But okay, what happens when Zuckerberg passes the company on or passes away? Now, Zuckerberg structured his ownership shares in such a way that no one can challenge his ownership. Sergey Brin and Larry Page have done the same thing at Google. So unlike most publicly traded companies, they are immune to shareholder activism. They are immune even to their board rising up against the founders and the CEOs. It's a very unusual structure of their company, and it means that they are, benevolent dictators of their company. So at some point, they're going to have to figure out what happens to their shares, their controlling shares. Now, often they, in cases of both the guys who run Google and the top leaders of Facebook, they will peel off shares and put them, devote them to foundations or give them, like in Zuckerberg's case, he gave a lot of shares to the Newark School Board, which became a complete debacle. But that's a whole other story. What happens when he loses? I don't know when he leaves. I actually don't know the answer to that question. But one of the things that the Google people say all the time is that the ethic of making the world better, and Google's motto, by the way, is, or mission statement is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And when I first came across that, back when I was writing my Google book, my first reaction was, who asked you guys to do that? That's kind of our information. Like, why are you taking this on? But the idea is that the ethic of the company and the goals of the company are written into the founding documents of the company and written into the IPO documents. So whoever runs it is supposed to conform to those ethics. So we'll see how that goes. I really don't know ultimately in a material way how that's going to affect things. Yes?
So do you think that there is a lack of critical thinking being taught in our society, and that this is kind of an inevitable convergence of that and human nature and the evolution of technology in play?
Maybe there's too much critical thinking. I want to just not quite playing devil's advocate with this. Like, part of the problem is that we actually criticize everything from a gut level without thinking about how and why we criticize things. Or I have a student who, he's a first-year student at UVA. He just moved here from Shanghai. And in this class, which is very much about these issues, about truth and trust, he made it very clear that anytime someone makes a claim and footnotes anything that has appeared in the BBC or CNN, that he considers the BBC to be a propaganda instrument of the British government, and that CNN is a propaganda instrument of the US government, because he knows no other way of thinking about a news organization, right? That's all he's ever known. He cannot separate the idea of a major news organization from the government under which it operates. That is not an uncommon thing around the world, and it's a growing assumption in the United States. So in many ways, critical thinking, like being critical, is almost too often practiced, which is one of the things that undermines trust in institutions that do probably deserve or have earned some trust over the centuries. So this is the weird thing. I'm not sure that saying critical thinking is the right approach. I think we might want to try thinking. Because that means that we can actually decide, like, I have no idea if the polar ice caps, like, I have no direct empirical observations about the polar ice caps melting. But I do have faith and trust in the community of scientists who tell me they are. I have no reason to doubt their motives. I have no reason to doubt their systems of checks. I have no reason to doubt their systems of peer review are not over time, overall, mostly effective. And so I am willing to tell you straight out the polar ice caps are melting at an alarming rate. And that's all I can do, right? I don't have direct knowledge of black holes. I don't have direct knowledge of how genes work. I can't. And so I have to trust the communities that generate that. Now, what that means is that I am assigning the trust to the letters PhD, to the institutions for which these people work, and the scholarly organizations to which they're affiliated, and the journals in which they publish, and there's sort of matrix of those markers of authority, because that's the best I can do and the best any of us can do. And so I would actually like us to be a little less critical of that, but also understand that within those communities, there's a tremendous amount of imperfection, there's occasional corruption, there are tremendous mistakes, there are complete misreadings, and there's revision. And again, if we're modest, and if those communities are modest, then, over time, we figure out a better way of viewing the universe, or a better way of viewing how genes work, or a better way of measuring climate change. So that's a long answer to your question. But basically, yeah, I think we need to re-engage in thinking. And one of the problems with living through our phones and engaging with each other, especially in matters of public importance, through these very flat, tiny holes of media, is that we cannot think collectively. We cannot think collaboratively through these. It doesn't mean we shouldn't use them for the things that are useful, right? For which it serves us well. Keeping up with friends and family, for instance. But it doesn't serve us well to argue about climate change, or anything, actually, anything important, complex, etc., through Facebook or Twitter or WhatsApp, but that's where we are. So I think we need to reinvest our time and our money in the institutions that actually help us think, train us to think, and train us to value thinking. And by that I mean, of course, universities, libraries, scholarly institutions, scholarly research, public schools, and the finest journalism. And we actually, at this point, need to have pretty massive public infusion of support if we're going to care about facts and ideas and debates which are at the core of a Republican form of government. Now, we might not care about that anymore. We might only care about where we buy boots. But I hope we care about more than that. It's going to be a long slog. I don't know whether our efforts to learn how to think again are going to see fruit quickly enough to save this democracy, but I sure hope so. That's the last thing I can say.